All right, let's jump right in. Ready for another deep dive.
Always ready.
Awesome. Today, we're tackling something that I think a lot of people, especially in the autistic community, have probably thought about.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's this whole idea of the college debt trap. Like, is college really the golden ticket it's made out to be? We're going to explore this using a paper by Jaime Hoerricks. It's called The College Debt Trap: How Autistic Students Are Exploited by the Financialisation of Education.
Oh, wow, that title's pretty powerful. Exploited. That's a strong word.
Right. And, we're going to break it all down. See, this paper, it really questions that whole go to college, get a good job, be set for life narrative.
Which, let's face it, has been pushed hard for, like, forever.
Exactly. And for autistic students especially, it's like, is that really the whole story?
I mean, think about it. That narrative of college equals success, it can be especially compelling for autistic individuals, you know? We're often taught to rely on authority figures, follow social norms, so to question that, it's tough.
It's like, the grown-ups said so it must be true.
Exactly.
But then you look at things like, well, student loan debt in the U.S. It's at an all-time high, right?
It's crazy, isn't it?
It is. And the paper points out that autistic students, because we often need those extra support services, we end up relying on loans even more.
Which is just adding to that burden, you know? And
Yeah.
then even if you do graduate, the job market, it's not exactly, welcoming with open arms to autistic graduates.
Yeah, it's a whole other world out there.
It is. And that's where that disconnect comes in. That promise of college equals success, it kind of falls apart when you bump up against things like systemic ableism, hiring processes that are just not accessible, workplaces that aren't set up for neurodiversity.
Right, and it's like, wait a minute, this isn't what I signed up for.
It can be really disheartening, for sure.
It is. And then on top of that, this paper is arguing that universities themselves, they're operating more like, well, businesses.
Interesting. I mean, in some ways that makes sense, right? Tuition is their main source of income.
Yeah, and they're using these things called revenue bonds, which are basically loans backed by, guess what, future tuition.
Oh, wow. So it's like they're constantly under pressure to raise tuition to guarantee they can pay back those bonds.
Exactly.
And who ends up paying the price for that?
Well, the students, right. And especially those who, like we said, are already more reliant on loans, like a lot of autistic students.
So it's like, in a way, autistic students who are often seeking stability and acceptance, they're almost being, I don't know, lured into this system.
It's like the paper calls it systemic gaslighting.
Whoa, okay, strong words again.
Yeah, but hear me out. It's like from a young age, you're told college is the only IY path to a good life, even though the reality is, well, it's much more complicated.
Yeah, you're told this is how you become independent, this is how you get a secure future. And for a lot of autistic folks, that message comes from people we trust. Teachers, counselors, even our own families.
It's like, who are we to question that,
Exactly. It can be really hard to push back against that narrative, even if deep down something feels off.
And the thing is, it's not just about questioning college itself. It's about why aren't we talking about other options? Trade schools, apprenticeships, going straight into the workforce. Maybe those paths fit better with autistic strengths and interests. Yeah.
Right, think about it. A lot of autistic people thrive in structured environments, predictable routines, focus on specific skills. That sounds a lot like a lot of trades.
Exactly. But we're so stuck on college or bust that we miss those possibilities entirely.
It's like we're limiting ourselves before we even get started.
And speaking of limitations, let's not forget the financial side. The paper actually cites research by Osterman, and they highlight just how much more expensive college can be for autistic students.
Right, and that financial strain, I mean, we know from research by Quadlin and Rudell, it can lead to serious mental and emotional stress.
It's a heavy burden to carry.
It really is.
And that's where this idea of exploitation comes back in. The paper uses that word to describe how this system impacts autistic students.
Yeah, it's a strong word for sure.
It is. But it's like autistic students are drawn to this promise of a better life through education. They're seeking stability, acceptance. But if the system is built to prioritize profit over well-being, that's a problem.
It raises some serious ethical questions, absolutely.
So it's like this system is potentially setting up autistic students for failure, burdening them with debt, and maybe even taking advantage of their hope for a better future.
It's a pretty bleak picture, yeah.
It is. But the good news is the paper does offer some solutions. They talk about exploring those alternative paths, like trade schools and apprenticeships. And they even suggest some pretty big changes, like universal basic income, tuition-free college. It's about creating a system that actually helps all students succeed, including neurodivergent folks.
Okay, I'm really interested to hear more about that.
Me too. And that's exactly what we'll dive into next time. But before we go, I'm curious, what's standing out to you so far about this college debt trap idea, especially for autistic students?
Well, what really strikes me is, honestly, it's how this system, this whole you have to go to college thing, it can actually, close doors for autistic
Yeah.
students. We talked about how a lot of autistic people, we do really well in structured environments, clear expectations, focusing on specific
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah.
And those are things you find in, trade schools, apprenticeships.
Right, but those get presented as, the lesser than option. Like, oh, if college doesn't work out, then you try those.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
that's so messed up, It's like reinforcing that there's only one right way to be successful, and that's just not true.
It's so limiting.
It really is. I mean, there are tons of awesome careers out there that don't need a 4-year degree. And for a lot of autistic people, those might be a much bigger fit.
The paper even specifically talks about, the trades as an example.
Oh, yeah. And there's a reason for that. Think about the skills people often associate with autism. Attention to detail, liking routine, that deep focus on specific interests.
That's, perfect for so many trades.
It is. Plumbing, electrical work, carpentry, even coding, those are all things where those skills are super valuable.
It's funny because those things we talked about earlier, those neurotypical workplace norms, the open offices, constant socializing, all those unspoken communication rules, those can be huge e-barriers for some autistic people.
Oh, totally.
But then you look at the trades, and it's often more structured. You have clear tasks. It's hands-on. It's like a completely different world.
And there's often more emphasis on mentorship and apprenticeships, too.
Well, that's interesting.
It is, because, for some autistic people, learning by actually doing stuff with guidance from someone experienced, that can be so much better than, sitting in a lecture hall.
It makes you wonder if we're, doing autistic students a disservice by pushing this one-size-fits-all education model, when there might be these other paths that actually make more sense for them.
Totally. And the paper takes it even further, saying that this whole college for everyone message is actually a form of, systemic gaslighting.
Okay, I know that's a strong word, but I'm curious. What do they mean by that?
Well, it's about how autistic students are constantly told that college is the only way to be independent, to be financially secure, to have a good life.
I know we've already seen that's not always true.
Right. So it's like this pressure, this constant message of college, 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 even if other options might be better, might even be what the person actually wants.
But who's doing the gaslighting, so to speak?
It's not just one group, unfortunately. It can be teachers, counselors, even parents, people who truly believe in the college myth themselves.
The paper even mentions Autism Parenting Magazine as a source of this kind of advice.
Right. It's coming from everywhere.
And that's got to make it hard for autistic students to, find their own voice, figure out what they actually want.
Oh, absolutely. It can feel like you're constantly fighting against the tide.
But even if we, set aside the college myth for a second, there's still this huge issue of student loan debt.
Right, especially for autistic students who often have to rely on loans even more to cover those extra support services.
It all adds up.
It does, and it makes this whole system even more problematic. Students are being pushed towards this expensive path. They're taking on all this debt, and then they might end up in a job market that's not even set up for them to succeed.
So we've got these individual challenges, but the paper also talks about, bigger system changes that need to happen. What are some of the solutions they propose?
Well, one thing is exploring different models of education, like expanding those vocational training programs, apprenticeships, making those more appealing and accessible to autistic students.
So it's not just about getting rid of college, it's about having other choices.
Exactly. And they also talk about needing more support within the existing system, better access to accommodations, more helpful career counseling, even training programs to teach employers how to create neurodiversity-friendly workplaces.
That sounds like a pretty big shift in how we think about education and employment.
It is, but it's so important. It's about making a system that actually works for everyone, no matter what their neurotype is.
Now, the paper also throws out some pretty radical ideas like universal basic income and tuition-free college. How would those fit into all of this?
Okay, so universal basic income, that could be like a safety net for students, you know? It would take some of that pressure off to get a college degree just for the money.
Makes
And it
sense.
could give autistic people more freedom to explore different paths, like starting their own business or pursuing their passion without worrying about like being broke all the time.
And what about tuition-free college? How would that change things, especially for autistic students?
Well, it would mean that money wouldn't be a barrier to going to college anymore, right? For anyone, including autistic students who might not be able to afford it
It
otherwise.
would level the playing field a bit.
Exactly. And it would mean autistic students wouldn't have to choose a major just because it pays well. They could actually focus on what they're interested in, what they're good at.
So it's about more options, more flexibility in the system.
Exactly. But it's not just about changing policies. It's also about changing how we think about all of this.
What do you mean?
We need to stop thinking that there's only one way to be successful, you know? We need to start seeing neurodiversity as a strength, not a weakness. And we need to build a world where autistic people feel like they can choose their own path without being judged or feeling like they're not good enough.
That's a big goal, but it feels important.
It is. We're talking about people's lives here, their futures. We can't just keep doing things the same way and expect different results.
Well said. Now, the paper doesn't just focus on the practical side. It also talks about the emotional toll this whole system takes on autistic individuals.
Right. Oh, yeah. And that's something we're going to really dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, looking forward to it.
We'll talk about those feelings of betrayal, the pressure to conform, and like the long-term impact of feeling like the system failed you, even though it promised you the world.
So stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll unpack the emotional side of this whole thing and explore what we can actually do to make things better, to create a more supportive environment for autistic individuals figuring out their education and careers. Welcome back for the final part of this deep dive. And wow, we've covered a lot of ground already.
We have. It's a big topic.
It is. And, we've talked about all the financial pressures, the systemic problems, even those alternative paths that don't get enough attention.
Right, right.
But now I want to shift gears a bit and focus on something just as important, maybe even more so, the emotional impact of all this.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about numbers and statistics. It's about real people, real lives.
And, the paper uses some pretty strong language, words like betrayal and even exploitation.
Yeah, those are heavy words.
They are, but do you think they're accurate, in this context?
I think for a lot of autistic students, those words actually reflect a very real experience. Think about it. You're told your whole life that college is the key, right, to a secure future, to independence, to success. So you work hard, you take on that debt, you put your faith in the system, you trust it. And then even after all that, you're struggling to find work, the debt is piling up, and it's like, wait a minute, what happened to all those promises I was given?
That's got to be so disillusioning.
It is. It can be devastating. And for autistic people, we often place a lot of trust in authority figures. So that feeling of betrayal can be even deeper. It can shake your whole worldview.
And the paper even talks about how this can lead to, increased anxiety, depression, maybe even feeling isolated, hopeless.
Yeah, and it's like this vicious cycle, The financial stress feeds those mental health challenges, and then it's even harder to cope with everything, finding a job, managing the debt, just everyday life.
It's a heavy load to carry.
It is, and it's not just an individual burden either. When we don't support autistic people in finding fulfilling work that pays a decent wage, we all lose out.
That's a good point. Society as a whole misses out on those talents, those perspectives.
Exactly. Instead of contributing, autistic people can end up feeling marginalized, disillusioned. It's like a wasted opportunity for everyone.
So where do we go from here? What can we do to actually address this, to create a better environment for autistic people?
Honestly, I think the first step is awareness. We have to start acknowledging that this college myth, it doesn't work for everyone, and autistic students were especially vulnerable in this system.
So we need to be talking about this more, having honest conversations about the challenges, the alternatives, even those big systemic changes that need to happen.
Yes, exactly. And it can't just be talk. We need action, concrete solutions. Expanding those vocational training programs, making accommodations more accessible in schools, A&D workplaces, even teaching employers how to create neurodiversity-friendly environments.
Right, actually changing the way things work.
Exactly.
Now, the paper also mentioned some pretty big ideas like universal basic income and tuition-free college. How do those fit into the picture?
Okay, so Universal basic income, that could be huge, because it would give people a safety net financially. It would take some of that pressure off to like half to get a college degree just to survive.
That makes sense.
It would give people, autistic people especially, more freedom to explore different paths, like maybe starting their own business or focusing on their passion without constantly worrying about money.
And what about tuition-free college? I mean, obviously that would make college more affordable for everyone, but how would it specifically help autistic students?
Well, it would create a more level playing field, right? Autistic students could pursue their interests without being crushed by debt. They wouldn't have to pick a major just because it pays well. They could actually focus on what they enjoy, what they're good at.
So it's about more choices, more flexibility within the system.
Exactly. But again, it's not just about policy, it's about changing our whole mindset.
Oh, you mean?
We have to stop thinking there's only one right way to be successful, you know?
Yeah.
We have to start valuing neurodiversity, seeing it as a strength, not a problem. And we have to build a world where autistic people feel empowered to choose their own end path without judgment, without feeling like they're not good enough.
That's a big goal, but it's an important one.
It is. This is about people's lives, their futures. We can't just keep doing the same things and expect different results.
Well said. So, to wrap things up, what's the one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I'd say if you're autistic and thinking about your future, don't just blindly accept that college myth. Do your research, look at all your options, figure out what truly fits you, your skills, your interests, your goals. There's no shame in choosing a path that doesn't involve a traditional four-year degree.
And for those of you listening who aren't autistic, be an ally. Educate yourselves. Challenge that college myth when you hear it. Support policies and initiatives that promote neurodiversity and inclusion. We all have a role to play in making a world where everyone can thrive. And that wraps up our deep dive into the college debt trap, especially how it affects autistic students. It's a complex issue, no easy answers, but hopefully this conversation gave you some new perspectives, some things to think about. Remember, your journey is your own. There's no one-size-fits-all path to success. So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep advocating for a world that values and celebrates neurodiversity in all its forms. Thanks for joining us.